Well, obviously it's going to have to be a very short talk because I didn't have a whole bunch of time to put together a lot of notes. All right. We are beginning the last of the four Mabinogi, which is called math. Not the subject mathematics, but math, the man. And the Mabinogi called math is the richest of the four Mabinogi in terms of mythical content and in terms of philosophical issues and ethical issues. It's just rich in everything. It has the most images and the most allegories, including astrological images and allegories. And there's so much of it we won't have time to cover everything even in the next talk. It has an enormous amount of magical lore, but because the magical lore is so deeply coded, we may not be able to penetrate much of it. It also has a lot of esoteric information, which, because we are not initiates, is also difficult to penetrate. So despite all of these limitations, we're going to miss most of the stories, most of the hidden material in the stories, but it's still going to be very, very, very rich. The story of math takes place in Gwynedd, which is the largest and most powerful part of Wales, and it's the northern part. It was also where Bran and the other children of Lear were from. So it's rich, powerful, and prosperous. And it brings out a mythological element that is found in all Northern Hemisphere myths, and even in mythical lore. And that is that Dyfed, where Pwyll, or Pwyll, and Pryderi hail from, is almost interchangeable with Annwn, the realm of the dead. So much so that Pwyll is sometimes called the Prince of Annwn rather than Aran. And it wasn't just because of the 1 year that he was a changeling for Arwan, but because there was this very close association. It's almost as if Dyfed was a gateway to Aran. So it is in a similar way that Gwynedd is treated something like an Olympus, an abode of the gods. However, all of the gods are put into human forms, so that the names of Beli and Bran and Branwen and Manawyddan and Math and Arianhod or Arianhod and Gwydion are all the names of gods. And you can trace them back into other Welsh mythology in Ireland and places like that, even though they make up the stories that we're talking about now, and they're seen in human form. The north seems then heavenly. It seems like a superconscious kind of place, in the same way that the south is seen as something lower. Dante, in his Divine Paradise, even has purgatory located in the southern hemisphere. And so it's something more like a dull and dreary personal subconscious. In fact, great as the heroes of Dyfed were, they appear in some ways almost inferior, or almost like brash young people, young in spirit and young in age, when compared with the people of Gwynedd. So math is the king of Gwynedd, and he is a contemporary of Pryderi, who plays a large part in the story, at least in the first part that we're looking into. Like many of the royalty in Wales, and in Ireland for that matter, Math is huge. Not as big as Bran so that they couldn't build a hall for him, but he's still large, and he does live in a hall. Gwynedd and Math are spoken of as such a holy place that Math has a character that he can't put his feet on the ground. They always have to, the only time that he can put his feet on the ground is when there is a war. And when he has to rally the people and lead them into war is the only time his feet are ever found on the ground. So it's a really interesting thing. It's not because he has sore feet, like big people often do, but it's part of the esotericism and part of the law of Gwynedd, that he's not allowed to do this. The law says that Math's feet have to be held in the lap of a virgin, except in the occasion of war or some other extremity of that kind. And the virgin has to be proven as a virgin by the magical power of the king. And when the story of Math begins, the woman who is the virgin is exceedingly beautiful, and she's exceedingly pure. And her name is Goewin or Goewin or something of that like. And she's a very devoted footholder. Beside being a lovely picture, I don't mean by that she's a footstool or anything like that. I don't mean anything. It is filled with all kinds of esoteric meaning. And we're going to go back to something that we talked about last time, and that is mistletoe. Mistletoe was greatly revered by the Druids. Last time we mentioned that mistletoe was a parasite, and to students of the mysteries, parasites are usually seen as something of reverence, because they form a step between kingdoms. And in that state between kingdoms, they have special services that they offer. Mistletoe is somewhere between the vegetable kingdom, the plant kingdom, and the animal kingdom. Like a lot of vines, it grows as much as it can. It grows horizontally. And when it's horizontal, it's subject to the horizontal forces of the animal group spirits which circle the globe. And they normally play along the spines of animals, or at least the animals that are far enough along to have spines. It plays along their spines and it brings them the lessons that they need, which is why few animals can be upright, and if they are upright, they can't stay upright long because they lose the guiding forces of the group spirit. The plant group spirits, as we saw last time, or said last time, emanate straight out from the middle of the earth, almost like sunbeams. And you can see this, or you can prove this to yourself by just going into the Rocky Mountains or someplace like that. Because the trees don't form at right angles to the surface of the earth. They form at right angles to the heart, to the surface of the mountain, but they form at right angles to the whole shell of the earth itself. So that like if you have something like these mountainous pictures here, They won't be at right angles like this. They will be upright like that, because they are directed straight upward by the group spirit coming out of the earth. Now, the mistletoe has sacrificed its direct connection to the group spirit by not having roots connected with the earth. Instead, it puts its roots into the trunks of trees, and it derives its nourishment from them, and it's a delicate balance. They can only grow so much, because if they take too much nourishment from the tree, they sap it and the tree dies. And so it's an interesting connection. But by sacrificing its connection to the plant group spirits, it becomes a pioneer and becomes animal-like. And it develops a desire body or an astral body. And being something like an incipient becoming animal-like and having the beginnings of a desire body or an astral body, it responds to the astrological forces directly, where a plant does not. It does more through the group spirits and through the quality of correspondences. And it is like you couldn't make a horoscope or even have a planetary ruler for a plant in the same way that you could for an animal. So this has been proven. There is a study, a famous study by Ida Wegman in Germany, that shows that the extracts of mistletoe vary according to the position of the moon when it is harvested. And it's something that can be repeated again and again. And other heavenly bodies also have an effect, but not quite as much as the moon. Now, the vital body of the mistletoe is changed by the interpenetration of a desire body. Normally, a plant not having a desire body has only a vital body, and as long as the plant lives, it grows. It continues to grow and grow and grow. However, with animals, it's different. Animals grow until a degree of maturity when the individual desire nature expresses itself, and when that happens, then there is a struggle or a balance between the vital body and the desire body, such that growth is very small, except maybe in some organs like deer's antlers or something of that nature. But the continuing ongoing growth does not occur in an animal. Some people, like the anthroposophical doctors, take advantage of this. Some forms of cancer are when the indwelling individual spirit loses some control over its etheric body, and the forces for growth run wild, and they produce tumors. And so what they do is they use mistletoe, because mistletoe has the quality of being a plant, and a plant is an inverted human being, such that it puts its sex organs up in the air, where we have ours downward. We get our nourishment, as in sunshine, vitamin D, from the sun, or we get our direction from the sun. They get theirs through the roots. So like they're inverted human beings. And so there is a special closeness between plants and humans. Scriptures, East and West, claim that the proper food for humans are plants or vegetables. So there is something that, because of not having the desire element, it's much easier to take in what a plant has to offer and make it part of our physical being. So the mistletoe, being a plant, can be absorbed and drawn into the body like any other herb. But because it has the desire quality, which tends to curtail growth, it is attracted to where excessive growth is taking place, and it then turns out to be an effective treatment for restraining the uncontrolled growth patterns in a human being until the individual indwelling spirit can assert itself strongly enough to take over and control its own etheric nature and rid itself of the overgrowth or the hypergrowth. The ancient people looked at mistletoe in a number of other ways, one of which is somewhat interesting to us. In pre-Christian times, people could not leave the body as easily as they can do today. And mistletoe was sometimes used as a psychedelic agent to take people out of their body. Again, it had that same property of being absorbed like a plant, but it had the exciting quality of desire like animal substances do, and so it could excite one and raise one's body level to the point where one could leave the body. But it did so, the desire body in the mistletoe was basically pure. It didn't have all of the prey-predator relationship, and it didn't have all of the sexual quality in its desire body that animal substances have, because the animal substances can be used in a similar way. So in pre-Christian times then, mistletoe was seen as a golden bough which one used as an entrance to the realms of the gods. In a similar way, using that similar kind of reasoning, math is a parasite and was something like the mistletoe. To the Welsh, their kings did nothing but lead. They did some work as judges, and they did some work of administration, but they didn't do work. And whether they were worth nothing or whether they were very great and helpful people, they all received tribute. So they were sort of like parasites in that way. The effect of the plant group spirit working out of the earth and other forces that work in the earth have a tendency to bind us to the earth and to earthly living. So when Paul says that there is one human of the earth, earthy, and that there is another human that is a heavenly human, he isn't kidding. And he says in another place, there is another earthly law in our members, when he's talking about the inward struggle between the earthly and the spiritual. And the Gospel of St. John says that those that are born of the Word are not born of the will of the flesh, again, relating to the earthly quality. If you can remember from 7 years ago when we were looking at hero initiates, in one of the labors of Heracles, along the way, along the Barbary coast of North Africa, he was going to fulfill one of the 12 labors. He met this giant, powerful man called Antaeus. And Antaeus wouldn't let him pass unless he would wrestle with him. And so Heracles wrestled him down to the ground, and every time he touched the ground, he was renewed and reinvigorated and became stronger and stronger. And eventually Heracles realized what was going on, and so finally, in order to defeat him, he had to pick Antaeus up and hold him in the air and break his bones. the mineral part, the earthy part of the body. He had to break them, and then he just held him up in the air and choked him and waited until all the earth energy was drained out of him, and that's the only way that he could defeat him, and before, and then he could finally put him back on the ground. So math is something like the opposite of Antaeus. Math is suspended above the earth. He's always on his couch with his foot holder. And the only time that he ever leaves that more celestial position is when there is a regression. And when there is a regression back into earthly things, then he has to reconnect with the earth. Normally, his connection with the earth is through the foot holder. And the foot holder is sort of like his tree trunk, if he's a mistletoe. And the foot holder has to be a virgin, because she is his connection to the etheric mineral world. And he, being a lofty man, cannot have a polluted connection, because it's the very earthiness that he's trying to be removed from. So in the struggle between the etheric body and the desire body, that means non-continuous material growth, in a virgin, neither the desire body nor the vital body has been polluted or contaminated by selfish indulgences. And in this regard, the sacrificial element, the element of purity, the beauty of Goewen, is that she is exceptionally pure in all of these qualities, and so his relationship to the earth is a very clean connection, and so there's no taint of any kind. Now what happens is that by sacrificing earthly instinct, the mistletoe gains something else. It gains excitement, it gains motivation, and it gains the principle of desire. And Math also gains from the sacrifice of his earthiness. In terms of creatures, this is a general evolutionary principle, that to go forward in evolution, there is a sort of like a conservation of character, or of incompleted character, that in order to proceed forward in evolution, when we gain something new, it has to be at the sacrifice of something else. So the ability to continue to grow and to be a repository of vital life is sacrificed in order to gain desire. And there are numerous, in all the different stages of evolution that all the creatures pass through, there are various sacrifices that are made to specialize in different areas and to gain different qualities. Eventually, as the involution is brought to a completion and consciousness is raised to the level of evolution and we start becoming divine beings, then we gain back all of the things that we sacrificed, and because our consciousness is capable of more things simultaneously within a common unity that is held by a general central focus, then all of the characteristics that we have developed, all of the talents, all of the qualities that we have learned by sequential sacrifices are attained to simultaneously. And that's where when we have a full divine kind of being. So because Matt has sacrificed his earthy connection, he has developed other things in its place. And one of them is that he has the ability to hear everything that is said within Gwynedd. Even if it is whispered, he knows everything that's been said. It's probably actually more than that. he's probably not even hearing it with his ears. I suspect that what it is that he is in the negative pole of the reflecting ether, or just in the reflecting ether altogether. The two lower ethers have to do with biological function. The chemical ether with the maintenance of the physical body, and the life ether with the growth functions and vitality functions. But the two higher ethers, which get separated and are expressly for soul growth and for spiritual activities, are what math is specializing in. Now, it's the peculiarity that when we think, most of our thoughts never come to the light of waking consciousness in our physical body. It's an experiment that you can try out for yourself. All you have to do is be modestly sensitive and wide awake, and then lay down and take a nap at an hour that you're not used to taking a nap in. And as you're going to sleep, be thinking on some subject, or remembering some subject that you've been thinking on. And what you'll see is utterly amazing. Actually, what you will hear, because the reflecting ether is a much more auditory sense, where the light ether is a much more visual sense. What you will hear is something that you may have had a thought about or have made a discovery about. The Spirit has concluded much, much more to it. Because in the positive pole of the reflecting ether, there are all these deductive chains that are carried out. It's almost like you throw a stone in the water and it splashes every direction. And in the subconscious mind, in the reflecting ether, all these trains of thought from one central thought pattern go out in many directions all at the same time. And it's amazing what we're thinking about and what we're accomplishing that we never ever realize. And it actually isn't until after we die and we leave our body and we start retrospecting everything that has happened in our vehicles that suddenly we realize that we had all these thoughts that we never knew we had. Sometimes in our waking consciousness we can come close to being tuned into the reflecting ether, and we can about one subject we get the splash effect. You know, idea hits and there's this and this and this and this, and you can't follow them all. And so that's what math is capable of at any time. Now, obviously, I don't think math has the consciousness from the events that take place in the story. I don't think math has the consciousness that he's aware of all the thoughts all the time that are taking place in Gwynedd, but he can be aware of whatever ones he wants to, or whatever ones attract his attention. So even though he's stuck away in the hall with his foot on the lovely young woman and the pure virgin, he still is in touch with the kingdom better than if he were walking around with normal faculties, and was grounded in the earth like all of us are grounded in the earth. But he has another thing, because the people wouldn't believe always that it would be rumored that he had all of these powers, but people, like from Missouri, they have to be shown. And so they have to have demonstrable evidence. So he has another quality that helps make his office run more smoothly, and that is his nephew Gwydion, who is his sister's son, which means he is the crown prince. And Math loves Gwydion, and he is bringing Gwydion up. He's grooming him to be the king when his days are completed. And so he's teaching Gwydion politics, and he's initiating him into his magic. And Gwydion is a very clever, very bright, mercurial person. And he is young. He's immature. and he thinks too much of his abilities and too much of his knowledge, and he gets himself in trouble because of it. But at any rate, Gwydion is, I guess it would be pronounced Wydian, the G is almost silent. Wydian or Wydian makes the rounds of Gwynedd, and he's sort of a proxy for math. And the people see the crown prince coming around, and they feel secure, and they say, yeah, things are all right. And one time, as he's making the rounds of Gwynedd, he has his brother Gilvwethy with him. And he notices that his brother is troubled. And he asks his brother, he says, Gilvwethy, what's the matter with you? And Gilvwethy says, I can't answer because math will hear. And that's enough for Gwydion, because he's already picked up what it is with his brother, and he's able to discern from just a few words that his brother has said that he knows what's going on. And knowing his uncle Math, he whispers to Gilvwethy in a way that is not likely to attract the attention of Math. He whispers to him that he knows that he's in love with Gawain, and that he is lusting after her. And he also tells his brother that he loves him, and he will find a way, he will hatch a plot for him to have his heart's desire. So, since the desire is wrong, the plot also has to be wrong. It's a really interesting thing. Some things stick anyway, though. You know, if you use your musical talent to get people to buy more drinks, you may have to pay a high moral price for that in terms of past lives. However, because you used your musical talent and you developed it and worked with it, that will stick. But in the case here, what is happening is that the plot that Gwydion hatches is not good because its ends are not righteous. Gwydion is very young in age, and he's young in magic, and he's certainly immature. And like all young people, he's full of himself and overconfident. When you're young, you feel you don't make any mistakes. You feel you're going to live forever. And no matter what, everything is going your way. That's the way it feels when you're charged with all of that energy. In our evolutionary process, we are all Gwydions. We are all young. And the biggest trials that we have that prove our immaturity come on the basis of success. When we fail, or when we make mistakes, and when we're being held down and tied in, locked in because of our mistakes, we realize our limitations. But when everything is going well, we think it's because of what we are and because of what we did, not just because things that happen to be on the other stage of the cycle. We become overconfident, so that we are ensuring that the darker half of the cycle, rather than being purgative and cleansing, is going to again be limiting and extremely painful, because we have set in our over-positivity and in our unjust actions when we were feeling good, we've made sure that we're going to have pain. So they continue to make the rounds, and after they get back to the current capital, which is called Caer Dathel, which means stronghold, Gwydion goes to Math and reports to him. And during the course of the conversation, he sort of nonchalantly says, I hear they have some new creatures in the south. I'd like to get them. And Math asks, well, what kind of creatures are those? Apparently his powers don't go into the next kingdom. And Gwydion tells him they are pigs, but they're not like the wild pigs, but they're small and they're very succulent, very tasty, and these animals are called swine. Math says, well, whose are they? He asks all these proper questions right away. And Gwydion tells him, Aron gave them to Pryderi as a gift of friendship. And they're a gift from Anwen. So apparently that is something quite otherworldly about these pigs. And Math again asks the embarrassing questions, and he says to Gwydion, how do you plan to get them? And Gwydion tells him, well, I'm going to go there disguised as one of 12 men, disguised as bards, and I'm going to bargain for them. And Math says to him, well, you might not get them. And Gwydion is filled with confidence, and he says, my plan is good, and I will not leave without them. See, he's saying his plan is good. He's not telling the whole plan, which is actually heinous, actually a horrendous thing, and he's using misdirection. I would suspect that someone like Math would sense that something was amiss, and think, well, maybe it's just useful indiscretion. And he doesn't plumb, because he loves Gwydion, he doesn't plumb to the depths the intent of the plan. And he does sense the excessive self-assurance, where you feel that even bad deeds are good, or as one of our presidents once said it, when the president does it, it isn't a crime. He used to tell that to little kids in shopping centers in San Clemente. So Math gives him leave and says, go ahead, you can go and do it. So Gwydion and Gilvwethy and 10 others dress as bards, and they go to David, and Pryderi is holding court at a place called Rudlin Tievi. I think that's how you would pronounce it. And the 10 of them enter the feast hall and are immediately welcomed to the feast. But Pryderi wants something out of the deal. He wants some amusement, and he says, I'd like to hear a story from one of these young bards. And Gwydion says, well, it is a custom among us that on the first night the chief bard leads off and tells the story. So the chief bard happens to be Gwydion, and he starts telling stories. And it turns out that Gwydion is the best storyteller in all of Wales. And he has Pryderi and the entire court, he has them utterly fascinated. He goes on hour after hour after hour. He must have been like Itzhak Denison, who could tell stories all night and keep everybody that they didn't even get tired. But he's really clever, and he says, could anyone word my request better than I? Saying, I want something for all this storytelling. And Pryderi is sucked in by it all. He's enchanted by the story. And he says, no. He's taken in. And Gwydion then says, my errand is to ask you for the creatures from Anwen. And Pryderi says something really amazing. He says, no trouble. For these stories that would be easy for me to give them to you, but I can't. He said, I promised my people that I would give none of these swine away until they had reproduced to twice their number. And Whittian, like all young people, he's impatient. He wants it now. He says, I can free you from these words. He's clever. Basic dishonesty, he's saying, is I'm just freeing you from keeping your word. But he says, but don't give me the animals tonight, and don't deny me tonight. He says, tomorrow I'll show you what I'll give you in exchange. You can hear it just like the carnival barker. I tell you what I'm going to do. And so you can tell right away, as soon as he says, I am going to free you from your words, that's an automatic disqualifier. But Pryderi, you get the feeling of both Puel and Pryderi that they're honest people, that they're good people, that they're morally upright, and they're very brave, courageous to the nth degree, but maybe they're not the smartest, that they spent it all on martial energy and they had nothing left for mercurial activities. Whittian still doesn't know yet that if you're living the spiritual life, you live in your words. It isn't like Hamlet says, words, words, words. It is literally that we live in our word. One doesn't even have to be math to listen with an inner ear. What a person is right within their words. You can't fake it. Even the greatest actor can't fake what their true nature is. It's very much like Ralph Waldo Emerson said, what you are speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you say. It's a very clear matter that we do live in our words. So Whittian and his company are given quarters, and they repair to their quarters, and he tells the guys, we can't get the pigs for words. We're going to have to be more drastic to get our way. And he has somebody fetch him some toadstools. And he conjures the toadstools until they become 12 magnificent, big, beautiful black stallions with white fronts. And he also conjures up 12 greyhounds and all of the accoutrements that are necessary to dress them out in splendor. All of the finest leather and everything that is metal is made of solid gold, like the pins in the, what do you call it, where you put your feet in? Stirrups. The pins in the stirrups are made out of solid gold. Plus, he makes 12 glistening shields of very fine gold work, and he does this all by magic. And they're so splendid and they have so much gold that they really are dazzling. So the next morning, Whittian and his fellows come, and he offers these things as an even-up trade for the swine. And the people of David are sort of like the ruler. They're fascinated by the appearances of things, and they take a vote and they accept the offer, and they release Pryderi from the stricture they have placed on them, and the pigs are given to Whittian. And they take off immediately, driving the pigs, and as soon as they get out of sight, he tells the guys, we've got to really hurry. because the magic is only going to last one day. And they're going to turn into toadstools again. However, herding a dozen pigs is not an easy matter. And the first day they get to a small town in the cantreve of Ceredigion, and they stay there. And the town has ever since been called Mochdrev, which means pig town. And the next day they stop in another town, which is also ever since called Mochdrev. And the next day they get to a brook in the cantreve of Pois, and they camp along the brook, and that becomes called Mochnot, or Mochnot, which means pig brook. And then one more day, they stop over at another town in Rose, and it becomes called Mochdrev. There's a certain amount of repetitiveness in Welsh mythology. And it isn't like trademarks. We can only have one. And finally, they get the pigs back to Gwynedd, and some say they even had to put it on that wall that says, "What part of brief don't you understand?" Oh. The way they were received in David indicates how the Druids were revered. They were revered almost like the gods themselves. The more intelligent people revered them for the beauty of their poetry and their songs and their wisdom. The not so intelligent people who couldn't understand them had a respect born of fear, for they were afraid that, they could do something to them with their magic. So it wasn't really surprising that they should walk in to the feast hall of Pryderi and be treated as well as they were treated. Now we're seeing a society that has very different values than our own. I happen to be a jazz fan, and it's clear that our society doesn't really value songs. The jazz community is not supported here at all. The ancient world was very different. The power and the mystery of inner things was so uplifting to them that they paid any price for it. There was a priest from Babylon that came and taught astrology. I forget which one it was. It was either Poseidonus or I forget the name of the other. And they came in, two different priests from Babylon came to Greece, and they taught astrology and other esoteric arts. And the Greeks thought so highly of them that for one teacher, they made a statue of him, and in that statue, the tongue was solid gold. So they valued the word, and they valued poetry and beauty and all sorts of things like that. So if it hadn't been for the promise, Pryderi would have easily given up even a gift from the gods. The gift of Aran would have been given over just for the wonder of the story. Again, we find Whittian showing another fault, and that is impatience. All he would have to have done is waited one generation, because pigs have litters, and they would have doubled their number in one pig generation, but he didn't want to wait that long. Young people want what they want, and they want it now. and they sell themselves out in order to get what they want, to satisfy their lusts, their desires, their immediate attractions immediately. Now, it's not really bad in some ways as being preened for the kingship. He represents something like a candidate for initiation. He's slowly being initiated. And it isn't all bad that he wants all the marbles. He wants everything. I think we have to have that. We don't just want some talent. We don't want some spiritual ability. We want God. We want the whole thing. And unless we get the entire spirit, we're wrong. Because if we try to approach spiritual things in a partial basis, we're making them like material things, and we're certain to go astray. So it's not really bad that he wants the whole thing. I think if we desire God, or if we desire the Spirit, I don't know what words to use, above all else, and ask for that and that only, that is the healthiest kind of spiritual development we can have. Whittian makes a mistake, though, not in wanting everything that he wants, but he wants it exclusively. He wants it at the expense of David. He wants his kingdom to have something that was a gift from the gods for his kingdom and his kingdom only, so he wants the first generation. And whenever you want something exclusive, that's a problem. Now, toadstools are interesting. It's conceivable, but not necessarily so, that they could have been psychedelic mushrooms or psychedelic fungi, which were very common to the mysteries of ancient times. We know in Central America, it's still practiced to this day, yet the psilocybin mushroom is used for reaching states where you can read other people's consciousness. And we know at one time in India, on the mountainsides, they harvested the soma mushrooms, and they served a common thing. In this sense, though, it may be that there is some esotericism of mushrooms here that we don't know about. You know, this is a really, when there are this many images in a story, you become wary of almost anything. In any case, they represent something worthless. The mushrooms themselves, almost like daylilies, they have a very short life, and they turn to powder. However, they are an agency for the release of energy, etheric energy that has come from the sun, that is bound up in once living forms. And I think the mushrooms are pointing to something like that. He could have picked up any stone and tried to have converted magically, but I think the free energy, you might say the soul material that is in, we call fossil fuel or something like that, and burned that way, that soul material that is released in the mushrooms, it has something to do with why he chose toadstools. It has to do with magic. In order to do magic, it isn't a matter of knowledge. You have to have within your own being enough energy to do the magic, and to be able to get more energy so you can do even more magic. So there's probably something recondite about the magic statements, and we would never understand it. Remember the thing from Jack and the Beanstalk? Fee, fi, fo, fum? Fee, fife were magical words to the Druids. And that carried right in, it's now common lore. Obviously, I'm not I'm not a magician, so when I say fee-fi, I don't turn into a zebra or something like that. But they were holy words, or they had magical powers. Toadstools were also believed to arise magically. The spores couldn't be seen, and the lore was that toadstools formed where lightning had struck. Lightning representing the power of the divinity, the Holy Spirit, the lightning bolt being thrown or thrust being some kind of creative expression. So they were worse than worthless. They were considered poisonous. They were dark and deadly, like everything from Onwin. And they presage in our story that something dark and very heavy is going to come about. In some ways, there are special affinity between pigs and mushrooms. It is only pigs that can find the, truffles, yes, because they have that sense of smell. And Taurus rules both pigs and mushrooms. And mushrooms are filled with monosodium glutamate, which makes everything else taste better. So there is something here, since pigs in one regard represent an earthly, a fattened kind of materialism and the death that goes with it. Pigs and mushrooms being teamed together or replacing one for the other has something of that nature to it. But again, there's a lot of recondite information that I'm not privy to. So when the 12 built the pigsty and housed the pigs, they went back to Caer and when they got there, they saw an army being mustered. And when they inquired about what was going on, they were told that Pryderi had mustered a huge army and was marching on Gwynedd. And when they come to Math doesn't let them know how much he knows. And apparently he doesn't know at all, because he hasn't directed his attention everywhere, because the emergency of the moment has kept his consciousness bound up. He's out of his bed or his couch, and he rebukes them for traveling so slowly. And he asks them where the pigs are, since he has to go to war for these pigs. And he wants to at least know that they're safe, and they tell him where it is. And about that time, the trumpets are blowing, and the whole army sets off to do battle with Pryderi. But before the two armies can meet, there's a long march. And in the first night's encampment, Gwynedd and Gilvwathi go back to Caer Dathl. And they go into Mat's hall. And they chase out all of the women but Goewin. And Gilvwathi has his way with her. He rapes her. So all of this has been a two-pronged plan of Wydian's to both get the pigs and to get Math out of the hall so that his brother can have his way with the footholder. We see the same pattern that we've seen time and time again. The first sin, the sin of Adam and Eve, leads to the second sin, the sin of Cain. Sex and violence. In this case, it is a very illicit lust for sex against the most pure object in the entire kingdom. And so the sex itself becomes its most illicit form, rape. And so there is a natural, within a few sentences' time, a natural regression from sex, and the worst kind of sex, to violence in sex. At any rate, the next day there was a great battle, and it continued on and on and on. But eventually Pryderi and his forces had to retreat. They retreated so far, and then they took another stand, and they had a long pitched battle, and they were forced to retreat again, and they were getting whooped while they were retreating. And so finally Pryderi offers his own son and several other youths as hostages in order to have a safe retreat. Math accepts the hostages, and they begin their retreat, but by this time the feelings are so harsh that the soldiers can't keep from fighting, and it starts to break out all over again. And Pryderi doesn't want to lose his son. So he makes an offer to Math saying, I will stand in individual combat with the man who is responsible for this, and the war will be determined by individual combat. At this point, Gwydion has matured, and he swears by his confession to God that he will not ask the people of Wynedd to suffer any more on his account. And so he meets Pryderi in a long, fierce battle by a brook again. They fight, and they fight, and they fight, and Gwydion eventually uses magic and overcomes Pryderi, who is an old man by now, and the war is over. It's again at a stream where water and earth meet, a crossing line, saying that this is, we've crossed the line, and now things have to be brought to their final end. At this point, the army of Dyfed, sad at the loss of their illustrious king, with heads hanging, retreat home, and Math releases the hostages at Gwydion's request, and they return home, and Math goes back to Caer Dafil, and Gwydion and Gilvwaethy, understanding what's coming, decide that instead of going back with him, they'll make the rounds of Wynedd and see that things are all right with the people. They're trying to avoid judgment as long as possible. And Math calls for his footholder, Goewin, and she tells him that he must find another virgin for his footholder, for she no longer is such. And Math questions her, and she tells how the boys had participated and brought about her rape, and how she has been defiled even in his own bed. And without blinking an eye, Math tells her he'll do as much as he can to compensate what is wrong. And he immediately marries her. And he gives her regency over the kingdom, that he acts through her. And at least he didn't ask her to marry Gilvwaethy, which is the way they try to do it in our times, which is an ugly, ugly thing. He then gives out a general order to all the people that no one is to feed or to clothe or to give rest to either of the boys, which means they're left completely on their own resources. And eventually with their tails between their legs, since they're spoiled brats. They're part of royalty. They're used to having people wait on them and feed them and give them everything they need. They can't make it, and eventually they come back to Caer Dathel. And he asks them if they have come to make it up to him. And in effect, they submit to his wish. And without being too preachy, he tells them nothing can bring back a magnificent being like Pryderi. Nothing can bring back all the men that have been lost. And nothing can undo the shame of a war that was completely unjust. And that nothing can ever repair virgin purity. He tells them, and it penetrates right to their hearts. Then he takes out a wand. He transforms Gilvoithi into a hind. And he transforms Gwydion into a stag. And he tells them to come back after a year. And after a year, they come back and they have a fawn. And Math takes the wand and transforms the fawn into a human being and has him baptized as Heidwen, which means dear man. And then he puts him into foster care. Then he transforms Gwydion, this time into a female. He transforms him into a sow. And Gilvoithi, he transforms into a wild boar, and he sends them out for a year to live in the wild and to then come back. And when they come back at the end of a year, they have a piglet with them. And that piglet is transformed into a boy, which is called Hitchtwin, which means pig boy. And he's put up for foster care. He then transforms Gilvoithi, this time again into a female, into a wolf, she-wolf. And Gwydion gets transformed into a wolf, and they're told to come back after a year, and they do, and they have a wolf cub with them. And again, the wolf cub is transformed into a boy, and he's called Plydwin, which means wolf boy. And he's fostered. And then he transforms the boys back to their human forms, and he tells them to go get cleaned up. We won't spend much time talking about the battle. It is, again, a battle between the higher and the lower, in a way between the light kingdom and the dark kingdom. But it, like all battles, is an inward battle, and so it becomes a one-on-one battle. Heroes, the state between the human state and the demigod state in ancient times, was called the heroic state. And Gwydion and Pryderi represent heroes, initiates or initiates in the making, and they fight it out. It's extremely sad that Gwydion still hasn't learned his lesson. He still uses magic in a destructive way. He uses it to overcome an enemy. But at any rate, it comes down to a single combat. And it probably comes down to a single issue. The very selfishness that necessitated a divine being between a higher self and a lower nature, the one act of separative selfishness because the sin of Adam and Eve, as we saw several years ago, was not a sin of sex. It was the sin of using sex selfishly. It was probably the whole issue of selfishness. My goodness, there's all of these pages left. I can't believe this. It'll go quickly, though. Math, on the other hand, never uses force to bring them to justice. He does the very thing that God does. Remember in the temptation of Tantalus, who desired something, and the more he desired it, the more it pulled away from him. What math does is makes sure that we get the freedom that we bought at the expense of the fall. He just withdraws support from them. And he puts them even more on their own freedom. And in their own freedom, they come to justice voluntarily. It's a really very beautiful... The contrast between Whittian and math is really, really a very beautiful thing. When we think of unfolding higher powers, we think about the joy and the love and all the wonderful things we're going to be able to see and do. At first, we never think of the fact that when we open up spiritually, we're open to everything. Joy and sorrow. Can you imagine someone that has the spiritual powers and the even loving justice of somebody like math having to face the fact that he entered into a war, an unjust war, in which his side was culpable? The enormity of something like that for somebody that has that sense of sensitivity and that kind of love. If we think in that way, we can only imagine of what it must be like for someone like Christ, who understands all of the feelings, all of our selfishnesses, and all of the sorrowful things that we bring about. It must really, really be a very, very difficult thing. Personally, for this reason, I believe that only love can bring us to strength that we can face that much sorrow without being overwhelmed by it. And I think that this is why in all of the modern spiritual philosophies, the emphasis in growth is placed on love. Because only in love can we find refuge and strength and the ability to face very hideous things and do something to heal. Love is probably the thing that should be at the front of our mind all the time. It was probably equally shocking to have to face the fact that your very pure and beautiful connection with the world has been violated. And only somebody that has that kind of purity can appreciate the degrading quality of that kind of violation. But he doesn't miss a beat. Man, this is somebody that is so spiritually developed that it isn't like a Hamlet deliberating, should I or shouldn't I, or what should I do in this circumstance. He is so thoroughly imbued with divine character that he doesn't miss a beat, and he does what has to be done right away. He sacrifices himself if he has to. If you think about it, to sacrifice your own life and all of the traditions whereby you live for the sake of someone else, when you don't even have to do it. I mean, I have a hard enough time facing my own stuff that I have produced to think of going beyond it and sacrificing for somebody else's sake. The correction of the boys is exceedingly interesting. It isn't made as a punishment. Punishment is never really thought about. It's done as an experience which, being lived through, brings them to what they need to know. The Druids, more than any other priestcraft, are involved with shape-shifting. In fact, that's where the word actually originates from, which is now very popular in the New Agey movements. I just had somebody call and leave a message on my machine saying, I'm having problems with shape-shifting. I'm getting wrinkles. And when I called back, that's all over already now. In all cases recorded historically, verifiable, witnessed cases of shape-shifting, the shape-shifting seems to have always been purposeful. And again, we have to read between the lines. And when I read between the lines, I think that a large part of shape-shifting was educational. I don't think it was necessary. It said that so-and-so would take the form of a crow and fly over such and such region to find out what was going on. That's not necessary. If you have clairvoyance, even what is called traveling clairvoyance, where you can extend your aura to some place and see what's going on in that place, you don't need to change or transform your soul body into the shape of an animal or bird or whatever to go someplace else to get that information. You can get that information without doing that. So it probably was done for the sake of the people. Because the people who are blinded and can't see the invisible faculties need something at least quasi-visual to allow them to know that something is going on. It's something like the prestidigitation, like what people do now where they do feats of magic in Las Vegas and different places. That was developed to serve real magic, to serve thaumaturgy, because in order for real magic to be effective, quite often you have to have an open-minded crowd. And if you did a few sleight of hand tricks, that got people thinking, and that opened up their mind, and then you could do the positive type of magic. And so I think that shape-shifting was probably done for the benefit of the weak, so that they knew that something was going on. In any case, the transformation of forms, the corrective experiences, the 3 successive corrective experiences that the boys went through were remarkable in one respect. They were fruitful. That is to say, something came out of them. Something was produced. The story makes clear that it is a growing experience, and a growing experience that bears fruit. Whereas mere penal things never do something like that. Mere penal things just, you pay your debt, so to speak. And so it seems to me to have been a thoroughly positive experience. It leads me to believe that there's something else going on, the fact that they had to change sexes. It's like the story of Tiresias, who going out and seeing two snakes copulating, puts his stick between them, and he has a vision of his past life as a woman. And sometime later, a year or several years later, he's walking along again. He must have had some Scorpio rising or something like that. He sees two snakes copulating again, and he puts his staff between them, and he sees the life before that when he was a man. And these were both initiatory experiences. He had the power, or was given the power, by the mysteries. Obviously, two snakes with a stick between them is the caduceus of Mercury, is the symbol of initiation, and he was given that kind of information so that he could grow through it. And so this leads me to believe that these experiences of the boys were something like initiations in disguise. And the animals that they were, the animal forms that they took, represented different stages of the mysteries. Because a lot of mystery schools did that. The Persians, for example, each mystery was indicated by an animal. The Native Americans had the same thing with their power animals, that you went on such and such a retreat until you had such and such an experience with such and such animal. And so that is possibly what was going on. It's so hard to tell with a story like this. And that leads to the whole story itself. When the story is filled with so many illusions, all of the illusions of Gwydion, all the illusions of math, it's something of a tip-off that maybe the entire story itself is an illusion, and that we're caught in the spell of the story, just like the ancient Greeks went through mystery plays. Freemasons go through mystery plays to this day, and in that experience of something that is a story, that you're transformed. So this is probably an illusion. The whole story is an illusion that has many allusions as part of it. Some of the Druids were addressed as pigs. Others were addressed as either crows, ravens, or eagles. If we remember from previous talks, boar's flesh was always the symbol of cosmic wisdom. That in Valhalla, the warriors that served Wotan and fought to their last breath were taken to Valhalla, where they ate off of a pig, that as soon as they cut off a piece of pig, it was restored. Buddha was said to have died from eating too much pork. The anthroposophists, Rudolf Steiner, for example, claims that the spiritual energy which in us goes up the spine and into the brain and out the voice box, in animals normally goes out the tail. It's sort of like, who was it that said the good God chose to put the smile of a dog into its tail, and that since they are not self-conscious, that the spinal energy gets thrust out the tail as something like a shock absorber. Well, pigs have little teeny tiny tails, spiral tails, and pigs also have spiral penises. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But being Scorpio, I have license to talk about pig penises to my heart's delight. Normally, energy goes out tails or antlers or manes or something like that, and because they build up so much energy. But with a pig, it can't go out the tail. So that energy is instead put into flesh. So what in us becomes the wisdom of spiritual vision, when we can channel that energy and focus it through the pineal and pituitary body and see through the silent watchery into the spiritual worlds, in the pigs, that actually goes into the body. So the body was considered divine wisdom. So that's one side of pigs. We also know on another side, in the Eleusinian mysteries, on the second or third day, the pigs were driven down to the sea. And in St. Luke's Gospel, when the unclean entities were taken out of the man, they entered pigs and they ran down to the sea and drowned themselves. So there's something about pigs then that in another way represents greed and earthiness and something that is basically unclean. Something that when the cosmic wisdom is made flesh, it becomes something unclean. So it's not surprising then that the lower world, the darker world, that is David, would be associated with pigs that come from Aran of Anwen. So that brings us right back to the whole story. The whole theme we've been looking at in all of these talks. The pendulum of generation, degeneration, and regeneration that swings back and forth. We again have a bride that is passed back and forth, and this time the bride is taken from virgin innocence through ugly rapine to honorable marriage and power. Again, it's like the whole quality of the spiritual energy, which is virgin and being unused, being first contaminated by selfish sensual sexuality and eventually restored to some kind of virtuous power. Well, it's a consistent with everything that we have looked at. We again have a war, and a war where the bright kingdom, even with all of its failings and errors, is victorious. However, this time the story is different. We have two inner worlds. The one is close to the dead, and it's filled with dark images, and certainly with illusions, mushrooms and pigs, and the duping of the ruler. And then we have Gwynedd. Well, we have Math, which is almost a holy figure, and an honest virgin, and ultimate victory. And then we have somebody like Whittian, who's sort of like the squirrel on the Yggdrasil tree that runs up and down between the two kingdoms. In Christianity, using the words of Christ from the Gospels, we are admonished not to cast pearls before swine, lest they turn and rend us with them. This is exactly what we have done. We have violated the pearls of virgin impulses. We have degraded them into darkness, and a darkness that is replete with illusion. We dupe ourselves. We lie to ourselves, and we try to perpetuate the lies and indulge ourselves in fantasies. Cosmic wisdom has to be restored to Gwynedd, to the superconscious state. Yeah, it's true that Whittian is impulsive and selfish and immature, but who of us can claim to be otherwise? If we look at our motivations for entering into spirituality, they become more lofty as we go on, but they weren't always that way. I'm ashamed of some of my early motivations in spiritual things. I assumed I'm not that much different than anybody else. So it is a redemptive story. If you like numbers in those symbolic number things, it's true that there are 4 stations, all named after pigs, just like there are 4 material vehicles. There are 3 transformative states in Winid, when the boys are brought through 3 different kinds of initiations. And so you have the total human being, 3-fold spirit, 4-fold body. That's all there, but that's basically symbolism. And we have a teacher that rebukes us and says, why did it take you so long to go through all of these things? And the teacher is inward as well as outward. Those are all nice things. But the really important things about the story are that everybody is fruitful. And above all, everyone, including math, grows up. For the story, as far as we've gone with it now, everybody matures. Gwydion, in the battle with Pryderi, comes into his own, and he no longer wants other people to take the fall for him. They eventually, in freedom, take their own lessons that they need to be proved or reproved or cleansed. So everybody grows up. There's a lot more to the story than I see. That's obvious. But even like ourselves as beginners, we can get something out of it, and it's something that applies to living our lives. It's fabulously rich, and when we continue next time, we're going to go into some of the most beautiful, wild imagery that I've seen anywhere. It's almost indecipherably fantastic. But for now, we can leave off and realize that everyone does grow up, even us. That's it.